Welcome to the Swine Nutrition Black Belt Podcast, the latest swine nutrition research digested for you. My name is Clayton Chastain, your host for today's episode. Today we have with us Caitlyn Sullivan, a master's student at South Dakota State University. So Caitlyn, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Central Missouri, and I did my bachelor's at the University of Missouri, where I majored in animal science with a minor in plant science. And then I went on to higher education with working on my master's and defending hopefully next year in swine nutrition at SDSU.
Gotcha. So let's talk about some of the research that you recently published for your master's. So I saw your study on the effects of replacing corn with hybrid rye. Would you mind telling me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so kind of the ultimate background statement with using this hybrid rye in a grow finishing trial is that because of the concern for more sustainable pork, the industry is looking at alternatives to diminish that carbon footprint. And so this hybrid rye has been used a lot in Europe in their grow finish diets because of the benefit and growth performance as a cover crop for the high yields that it shows and the high resistance to ergot susceptibility. So ultimately, it would be used as a cover crop here in the U.S. to make those feeding systems and management techniques more sustainable. So we did this growth performance trial in Pipestone, Minnesota in a 2,400 head commercial wean to finish barn. Where it was a 89-day study. They started out at 45 kilograms and went to 125 kilograms as their market weight. So we had 80 total test pens that included 4 treatments where we replaced corn at a 40, 70, and 100% inclusion rate of that hybrid rye as their energy source to meet the NRC requirement. And each pen was blocked by their weight and then randomly allotted per dietary treatment. And then we had them in a 5-phase rotation all the way up to market weight, where we measured the body weights and the feed disappearance during each of those time events. And also that when we analyzed this data, we used pre-planned linear and quadratic contrast statements through the Glimmick's procedure of SAS to fully utilize the inclusion level of hybrid rye used in this growth performance data. So in the overall performance, we saw, because of the lack of ME in the diet, with us trying to assume the energy value of hybrid rye, we saw a linear decrease in average daily gain and average daily feed intake. But something that's interesting to note is that there was no response in feed efficiency between the 100% corn diets and the 100% rye diets, which I think is something really beneficial that we might need to look further into in continued research. But overall, because of that decrease in gain and feed intake, we saw lighter pigs in those 100% rye diets, and that there was no difference detected in feed efficiency. So something to kind of key in on is that because the feed efficiency was similar across treatments, we can indicate that we use the correct energy value of our hybrid rye at 1430 kilcals per pound of ME. And that with this data, we kind of can assume that there was a palatability or bulk density issue with feeding this hybrid rye that actually may have led to more satiety in those pigs and made them feel fuller longer, more or less, leading to the decrease in intake and gain.
So your abstract said that decrease in gain could have also maybe been due to some sort of anti-nutritional factors. So did you do any sort of fiber analysis to look at any possible anti-nutritional factors, or do you have any hypothesis of what those could be that was present in the rye that caused the decreased gain?
Yeah, so I personally in my trial did not do any fiber analysis with the hybrid rye, but there's previous research shown that using a multi-carbohydrates in the diets with more hybrid rye actually leads to a higher digestibility. But because of this, the layout of this trial, we were only trying to determine the overall growth performance of these pigs and to see at what inclusion rate led to a lack in performance with their gain and intake.
So what also did these diets look like when fully replacing corn with the hybrid rye? Were they still meeting all the NRC requirements pretty easily, or did you have to add any sort of extra ingredients to meet a couple requirements?
Yeah, so to kind of further expand on this growth performance trial, we're actually looking at the carcass quality with the yields and the hot carcass weight and the IV values of these pigs from corn to hybrid rye. So to not affect that variable that we were measuring, we did not add any added fat, but we also did have to add more crystalline amino acids to the corn diet because of the increase in bioavailable lysine in that hybrid rye.
Gotcha. And was there also any difference in formulation costs? Was one cheaper than the other in terms of like income over feed costs as well?
Yeah, so we looked at kind of the regular scenario where you would have like a high revenue and a low cost, or high revenue and a high cost period. And when we saw when production costs were higher, that the diets with the hybrid rye were estimated at $54 a head compared to corn, which was $56 a head. So I think something to kind of look at. Also, with when inputs were lower, the diet cost or price per head more or less um, with the hybrid rye was averaged at $77, and then that corn was $81. So I think something to kind of keep in mind, whether your costs are low or high, especially them now being fairly high, to look at something of integrating this alternative grain to feed.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember before we started recording, you also mentioned something about it being a cover crop as well. So for some farmers who grow their own crops, that could also be a good way to maybe cash in a little bit extra on that.
Yep. Yeah. So I think ultimately it's going to impact a lot of farmers that are diversified in their operations, that are growing their crops for their animals to feed, and integrating this cover crop that, like I said before, has all of this growth quality to the higher yields and the ergot resistance. But also, we will be looking at the agronomical impact with the fertilizer application and the impact it has on the soil health of those growing systems.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all we have time for. So thank you for coming on the show to share those results with us. And to everyone else listening, thank you for listening to the Swine Nutrition Black Belt podcast. Please visit us at swinenutritionblackbelt.com, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channel so you won't miss out on the next episode. See you next week. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And we are constantly on the lookout for the latest updates in swine nutrition. And if you have a swine nutrition related research trial that you would be able to share on our podcast, please send an email to nutritionblackbelt@swineit.com, and we would love to talk about your research. See you later.